Okay, so Dr. Tay is an assistant professor of industrial organization psychology at Purdue. He received his bachelor's in psychology from National University in Singapore and obtained his PhD in industrial organizational psychology at the University of Illinois. He completed a short stint at the Singapore Management University as a research fellow in 2012, and he's published over 30 papers in outlets such as the Journal of Applied Psychology, Organizational Research Methods, the Journal of Vocational Behavior, and many more. And so with that, Dr. Tay, we're so excited to have you tonight, and we'll let you take it away.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be presenting on the topic of well-being. It's near and dear to my heart. And also to be able to speak with all of you at PSG for the Leadership Summit. So I'm really passionate about the topic of well-being. And thank you again, Hannah, for the introduction. And in psychology, we often call it positive psychology, kind of thinking about the positive aspects of psychology, such as well-being and character strengths, which I'm sure many of you know about. And I've been researching the topic of well-being for about 12 years now, and have been fortunate to be able to contribute to things like the United Nations World Happiness Report, invited to the Aspen Institute to have a roundtable to talk about issues with regard to well-being, and also invited to Facebook to really think about and brainstorm topics about well-being with regard to how can we improve well-being of Facebook users, for instance. So there's a lot of interest right now on the topic of well-being, and many people like PSG and other organizations want to know about well-being and how we can improve well-being. I'm also trained in industrial organizational psychology. It's a little bit clunky. We often say IO psychology for short. What do we do? Well, the thing is we study things like leadership, teams, performance, organizational functioning, well-being within organizations, and then also how can we motivate people and select people for the job. So again, really excited because I see so much connection here with the PSG Leadership Summit, thinking about leadership and organizations and well-being. And so I'm very excited to not only present, but also to hear from all of you with regard to some of the issues that you're thinking about and things that I can learn from you too. So as any good educator, I have an outline in terms of what I want to present and go through. So there are some key topics for the talk. First of all, really kind of think about, why well-being is important. I know many of you know that well-being is important, but really kind of to be able to think more deeply in terms of articulating its importance. And then I use the term happiness for the talk, but really I'm referring to well-being, and there are many different components of well-being. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then think about how well-being actually can enhance both your life and the organization as well. And also to think about how we can further develop well-being for yourself and for the organization. Present a couple of resources, and then we'll have time, about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Hopefully I won't be a long-winded professor here, so we'll try to make sure that there's enough time for asking questions. So importance of well-being. So here's the answer in a nutshell. Why is well-being important? Well, there are philosophical, religious, social, political, economic, and organizational perspectives all point to the centrality of well-being for our lives. And why is learning about the importance of well-being, quote unquote, important? Well, I think that as leaders, it's very important to know how to articulate the importance of well-being and also advocate for well-being as well. So by learning about this, I think that we can be more effective in terms of leading organizations and also sharing the vision of why well-being is important. So Darren McMahon, who is a historian at Dartmouth University, actually wrote a book on happiness, a history. It's a great book, pretty thick, but really surveys how human history has really evolved around this central question of what is well-being and how can we be happy. So in his review, talks about philosophy and think about different philosophical traditions. But ever since the inception of philosophy, many people have already started to ask the question of what does it mean to lead a flourishing life? Or what does it mean to lead a life that is full of well-being? So Aristotle actually coined the term eudaimonia, and different philosophers have different visions of what it means to lead a life full of well-being. Aristotle focused on character, Stoics focus on self-control, Epicureans focus on pleasure, for instance. But really all are centered around the issue of well-being. And then with regard to religion and spirituality, many different religious traditions, especially monotheistic ones, think about the concept of paradise, which is the ultimate human well-being. And in those conceptions, well-being is really about being with God. And then non-theistic traditions such as Buddhism focus on things like enlightenment. How can we reach perfect fulfillment? And in the Buddhist tradition, it's really about seeking the truth and being freed from quote unquote the material world so that we can be delivered out of human suffering. And in terms of the past, lots of people have been thinking about the issue of well-being from a social perspective. So we think about in the past, many people have really thought of well-being as part of something that we should strive for. So think about what the philosophers have thought about. Others have really thought about it in terms of a given lot in our lives. So there's a German word called Glück, which means both happiness and also luck as well, which you can tell from the word Glück itself. But really kind of think about happiness as equated to fortune, your given lot in life. These days, actually, many of us think of happiness as important. And in fact, some of us even think of happiness in terms of perhaps entitlement as well, or at least an obligation to have. And in fact, when college students were surveyed around the world, they actually felt that happiness was even more important than things like money. And of course, money is pretty important. So if happiness is more important than money, then it probably is quite important. We can also think about the importance of happiness or the centrality of happiness from politics as well. So we think about the United States, for instance, in the Declaration of Independence. We talk about the pursuit of life, liberty, and also happiness as well. And interestingly, in Bhutan, they also have a minister of happiness who really looks at ways to improve the happiness of the nation. And beyond politics, we can think about economics. They can very closely tied to politics, but about a decade ago, The Economist, which many of you know is a famous magazine, talks about economic issues. They actually polled famous economists and readers whether they agreed with the notion that economists need to move beyond the notion of the gross domestic product, which you know is really important for the country. And 83%, as you can see, voted yes, that we really need to move beyond GDP to really assessing and thinking about well-being. And in 2010, David Cameron, who was the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, basically said that he was going to make happiness central to all the policies. So really moving beyond GDP to gross national happiness itself. And of course, from an organizational perspective, you guys know happiness and well-being is very important. And as you can see from the Harvard Business Review as well, more and more organizations recognize the value of happiness, like Facebook and many other big organizations, because they realize that happiness actually helps with driving profits. Very mercenary view, I know, but as I will share later, happiness does have a function to actually help with profits and also performance as well. So we've talked about why happiness is important and the different perspectives for why happiness is important. And so next thing I want to talk about really is what is this notion of happiness or this notion of well-being. And the answer or the short answer to it is well-being is fulfillment and fractal flourishing. So I'll explain a little bit more about what fractal flourishing is. There are many faces to happiness. And I think that by understanding the different components of well-being, you really can learn the latest research in terms of the different well-being dimensions from psychology and social science in general. And then you can also seek to understand what types of questions to ask in order to identify and support well-being in yourself and then also in others too. So I really want to make this pretty practical in terms of, as we kind of think about the different dimensions of well-being, we can also think about ways in which we can ask ourselves, are we thriving or flourishing on those dimensions, and whether those who are under our care are also thriving and flourishing too. So here's a slide that shows that well-being is really on a continuum. Often when we think about well-being, our mind goes to mental health. And when we think about mental health, we often think about mental disorders as well. So that's kind of quote unquote the negative side of well-being itself. And psychology for the longest time has really focused on that. So think about clinical psychology. Think about being on a couch and talking with a counselor, for instance. I think that's pretty stereotypical. But now with the advent of positive psychology, really the idea of well-being goes beyond just mitigating problems, but really thinking about how we can strive to reach full human fulfillment, this idea of flourishing. And I think it's really important to think about it from that perspective, because we don't just want people to be free from mental disorders. Lots of people are still trying to seek joy and meaning and purpose in their lives. And I think it's very important to have a goal of flourishing or of fulfillment in order for people to strive for and to reach. So as I mentioned, there are many aspects to this notion of happiness. Again, I use the word happiness very colloquially, but really it's this notion of fulfillment. And Carol Riff, who is one of the famous psychologists, has kind of come up with this idea of psychological well-being. And in psychological well-being, there are 6 dimensions that we can think about. One is mastery, whether you're mastering things that you're doing at work. Autonomy, whether you can make decisions freely on your own. Whether you have positive, fulfilling relationships in your life. Whether you are accepting of yourself and not comparing with others. That's the notion of self-acceptance. Are you growing in what you're doing and in general in your life? Do you have a sense of meaning and purpose? So I know that it's quite a lot here, but I'll try to break it down a little bit for you. And this is kind of how I think about it when I think about these 6 dimensions. So when we think about psychological well-being in terms of mastery and autonomy, I really think about it in terms of the work domain or the tasks that we are doing. And so you can ask yourself the questions such as, am I able to learn and master the work that I'm doing? And similarly, you can also ask the question for those who are under you. Are you facilitating ways in which they can learn and master the work that they're doing? And not merely just perform the work, but really to help them to grow in mastery. The other question that you can ask yourself is, do I have the ability to make decisions in this role I'm in? And of course, we can also think about that same question for someone under us. Do they have the ability to make decisions? Am I giving them some kind of latitude to make decisions, or am I trying to micromanage them? I think that's important to kind of think about in terms of facilitating their well-being. And then with regard to relationships and self-acceptance, you can really think about it in terms of kind of the relational aspect of life, which is kind of thinking about yourself in relationship to other people. So with regard to positive relationships, do I have someone that I can lean on and trust? And in fact, a lot of research shows that it's not actually the number of relationships you have, but really just having one or two very deep, meaningful relationships actually helps with your well-being. And you can also think about this as well from the perspective of those who would work under you, for instance. Can they lean and trust you in working with you? And then the other aspect is self-acceptance. Do I compare myself with others, or do I accept my own strengths and weaknesses? And I know that, especially with social media and all that stuff, it's very easy to compare ourselves with others, but I think it's a very important aspect of maintaining well-being. And so you can also think about it in terms of your subordinates, for instance. Are you, as a leader, comparing them with other people? Again, I'm not saying that you can't do those comparisons, but are you communicating that with them? Or are you really conferring them a sense of dignity and respect, that you value them as an individual for who they are and not try to compare them with other people? And then finally, we can think about growth and purpose as kind of directionality. And of course, you can ask the question, am I growing as a person? Do I have a clear sense of direction and meaning? I think that if you do, it really helps followers be able to see that. If you yourself do not have that, I think that you will not be able to give clear directions to others as well. And so in the same way, I think that for those who are under you, you want to think about how you can facilitate their growth beyond just the work that they're doing, but as a person. And then also kind of tie in the work that they're doing and other things to, for instance, PSG's mission, in order to give them a clear sense of direction and meaning as well. Another aspect of well-being from a psychological perspective is subjective well-being. And really in a nutshell is kind of, do you feel good and do you think your life is going well? So there are positive and negative emotions and also life satisfaction. So I think of emotions really as, a very important signal in terms of kind of sensing whether things are going well. So think about something very visceral like pain. Pain directs your attention. If you stubbed your toe, which happened to me many times, you immediately start noticing, ouch, that's something wrong here. And similarly, if you experience great joy, you start to turn to that and you focus on that. So am I feeling positive or negative? That's often a very quick signal that tells you whether something is going right or if it's going wrong. And then with regard to life satisfaction, if you have forgotten everything that I've said, life satisfaction is the easiest one and probably most easy to remember. In general, it's basically, is your life going well? And you can also be more specific, so you can think about, is this area of my life going well specifically, like with regard to health or with regard to academics or with regard to friendships or relationships? And this is the key one that, in fact, lots of organizations and lots of governments focus on. So they ask, in general, is your life going well? In general, is your work going well? And so forth. So if there's one question that you want to ask or even survey, I would say life satisfaction would be the key one within the organization. And often people think about, again, life satisfaction as fulfillment. So I've talked a little bit about, well, I haven't talked about fractal flourishing, but I've mentioned fractal flourishing. And this term was coined by James Pawelski. He's a collaborator and colleague of mine. He's the executive director of the Masters of Applied Psychology, Applied Positive Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. He coined the term fractal flourishing. where he talks about flourishing in a sense of a fractal. So as you know, fractal is about self-similarity, where the pattern is repeated at every single scale of analysis. So think about broccoli. Of course, eating broccoli is good for you, but really, this is just a picture of what a fractal could look like in nature. And the idea of fractal flourishing is that well-being goes beyond just any given individual, but really we have to think about well-being and flourishing across all different levels, and that it also has to be sustainable too. So one aspect, for instance, is sustaining well-being across all the different dimensions of well-being that I've talked about. So I think as organizational leaders, you want to think about, am I emphasizing only one aspect of well-being, for instance, or am I missing out other aspects of well-being? Another question as well to consider, or issue to consider, is when we think about fractal flourishing, we want to think about sustaining well-being for everyone. So when we kind of think about policies and things that we're doing as an organization, are we including everyone and really considering everybody's well-being in mind, or are we only focused on a few individuals? And I think that it's very important to kind of think about it from the perspective of diversity and inclusion, especially with regard to organizational well-being. And then finally, we want to think about sustaining well-being at different levels, or every level of the organization. So not only in the individual or in a relationship, but also teams themselves, and then also beyond that as well. So at every level of the organization, we want to think about ways we can use well-being practices that will apply. So the next topic that I want to cover is well-being and end in itself. So far we've talked about the importance of well-being and what do we exactly mean by well-being. And I want to talk about, as well-being and end in itself, because we talked about, for instance, with regard to emotions, that these are signals that let us know whether something is right or wrong. But really, well-being goes more than that. So there is actually a motivational function behind that as well, beyond just letting us know whether something is right and wrong. Because well-being can promote health, better relationships, greater performance for yourself and for the organization, and even better leadership as well. So by understanding more of what the consequences of well-being are, I hope to convey that well-being is not really an end in itself. It is a very important goal for the organization, but it's not an end in itself. There are virtuous cycles in terms of well-being leading to great outcomes. And then you will also recognize that well-being and performance are not mutually exclusive. Often, I've noticed that some leaders, not all, but some leaders often think about well-being and performance as two mutually exclusive entities. And if you focus on one, then the other has got to go. But I hope to convey that well-being actually is part of performance. Well, not really part of performance, but it really is supportive of performance, and it's so vital for a healthy organization. So I want to introduce to you the theory of broaden and build. This is a very famous theory in positive psychology developed by Barbara Fredrickson. And this is based on years of data showing that in particular one aspect of well-being, which is positive emotions, actually has both a broadening function and a building function. So what do I mean by broadening function? Well, experiencing positive emotions actually helps broaden your cognitive and behavioral repertoire. So you become more creative, you engage in more novel thinking, you tend to explore more. And so according to the figure, as you can see, leads to greater novel thoughts. You try out new activities, you become more entrepreneurial. You also are more open to relationships as well. And because of that broadening aspect, you start building enduring resources. So because you're willing to try new things, you are doing more things with different people, it builds your connections, it builds greater social support, resilience, and also skills as well. And ultimately leads to enhanced health, performance, fulfillment. And this leads back actually to greater positive emotions. So she calls this an upward spiral. And I think that we often observe this as well. We might not have the right labels for it, but we observe this, that good begets more good in some ways. In terms of health, I just want to name a few things that positive emotions and well-being in general has been shown to predict and actually causally lead to. It leads to lower BMI and lower blood pressure as well, and lower risk of heart disease. Research has also shown that it leads to faster cardiovascular recovery, healthy eating. In fact, when they brought participants in and induced positive moods and negative moods, they found that participants who were induced with negative moods tend to choose unhealthy options like fries and M&Ms. And I think we've all been there and done that before with stress eating, right? I grab my tub of ice cream and start eating. And then whereas with positive moods, they've actually found that participants actually chose more healthy options. I'm not sure whether they chose broccoli or not, but certainly more healthy than the alternative. Also, positive emotions and well-being is related to living longer as well. In particular, I want to point out one of the interesting studies here I show on the graph with regard to on the vertical axis, you see the percentage of colds, because I think it's particularly relevant during this coronavirus time. So these researchers, Cohen and the colleagues, actually brought in about 300 healthy participants who differed in different levels of their well-being, which they term positive emotional style. They gave them nasal drops containing cold viruses and then quarantined them in a hotel. So the perk is they got to stay in a hotel for a week. Even after controlling for initial immune functioning, individuals who had more positive emotional styles at the beginning, as you can see from the percentage of colds, had less objective and subjective cold symptoms. So the percentage difference really is about 10 to about 13% for both objective and subjective cold symptoms. So having well-being is actually protective even of being protective against something like a cold virus, and more broadly, it actually supports your immune functioning as well. And in terms of relationships, well-being actually promotes relationships as well. So think about how we often gravitate toward people who are cheerful rather than folks who tend to complain or gripe about things. So there is an attraction there that leads to high quality relationships, and research has actually shown that. And this is not just based on the happy person's evaluation of their relationships, because obviously that's going to be confounded, but really looking at objective, third party individuals who then rated these people's relationships. They found that they had better quality relationships overall. And also, well-being leads to better interpersonal communications as well. How does well-being then affect your organization beyond yourself? Research shows that well-being actually promotes task performance. So when people are induced to positive moods and they actually look at what people are producing in terms of tasks, they find that they can produce about 10 to 15% more as compared to individuals in the control condition, so who are not induced to positive moods. When people are more positive, often they feel more valued. They engage as well in more citizenship behavior, which is behavior that goes beyond what you've assigned somebody to do. So they take on more volunteer acts. And also, well-being is also promotive of better public speaking. So when, again, experimenters actually induced positive mood and had people speak publicly, they had also had raters who were naive to those experimental manipulations, rate them on public speaking. Individuals who were induced on positive mood actually had better scores on public speaking. Similarly, the same designs as well were applied to negotiations, and they also had better negotiation skills as well. With regard to leadership, leaders who have higher levels of well-being and positive emotions are often perceived as more authentic by the followers. Research has also shown that in organization settings, it generates actually greater creativity in subordinates and also leads to better outcomes too. So for the organization, more positive leaders actually equal greater positivity within the organization and beyond it, so that they have better customer service and satisfaction as well. So let me check my time. Okay. So for the next section, so we've talked about the importance of well-being, what is well-being, and I guess I forgot what we did. Oh, how does well-being actually enhance you and your organization? So then we come to the issue of, well, Louis, how do we actually go about developing well-being? So here's the answer in a nutshell. Two things, developing character and leadership communication. So with regard to developing personal well-being, I call it character development because a lot of positive psychological interventions actually focus on, developing positive habits and positive mindsets. And if we think about that, a lot of research actually shows that these positive interventions where they actually help improve positive habits and positive mindsets actually improves our level of well-being. These are all effortful and they require commitment to develop. That is to show that when you stop doing these exercises, often the gains in well-being go back to normal again. The other aspect to kind of think about why I perceive it as character development is that we're evolutionarily wired toward negativity bias. So what is negativity bias? It's that people in general, you and me and all of us, we remember, we attend to, and we respond to negativity more than positivity. So we basically remember negative experiences better than positive ones. It's easier for us to recall insults as compared to compliments. And also we respond more strongly to insults as compared to compliments as well. And there's an evolutionary function for it because scientists and researchers have actually thought that we require that negativity bias to survive all the hostile threats in our evolutionary history. And so we're just wired that way. And so again, there is a function toward negativity bias, but in order to cultivate positivity and well-being, it's very important to recognize that and also realize that, hey, I need to really be mindful and be committed to developing these positive habits and positive mindsets, because the default is I will see a cup and I will think of it as half empty. So there are a few aspects that I want to touch on. There are many different positive psychological interventions, but I want to touch on just a few here. The first one is gratitude. And gratitude broadly can be defined as behaviors that recognize benefit from a beneficiary. So we can think about benefit that you receive from someone. You can think about benefit that you've received. Some people think about it more broadly from nature or from Mother Earth, or even for those who are religious or spiritual, from a deity or from God. And so there are ways that which we think about being thankful, and as we express gratitude, it actually helps us look beyond ourselves toward the positive that we have received. And this actually shows to be a very powerful way of promoting personal well-being. The interesting about well-being is when you start pursuing only yourself and your happiness, you tend to lose it. So that's a very fascinating thing about well-being, where if you're only focusing on your own personal well-being and you want to promote your own personal well-being, you tend to be more unhappy than if you don't focus on that. So gratitude helps you to focus outward. And there are a couple of things here that I suggest that you might want to think about. One is in terms of emails. Very often, we get into task mode and we start emailing somebody and say, hey, can you do this or can you do that? It's important, I think, to pause and to kind of think about, hey, what has this person done so far that I can be grateful for and I can actually go ahead and thank this person for? So kind of think about that. Think about pausing before you respond to emails or when you email somebody. And when you think about something that you're grateful for or you're thankful for, email that individual and thank them. So I think that's a really good practice to have as somebody who is a leader. I think that also helps encourage someone as well when they hear how grateful you've been. The other way to promote gratitude that is shown to work is have a gratitude journal, or when you journal, write things that you are thankful for. So I do this personally. Again, I don't journal every day, but you can think about even weekly, daily, weekly, or monthly, where you kind of look back and you think about things that you can be grateful for and write it down. Take time to really just savor those moments. And if you can, remember to then go ahead to thank the individual or the organization or whoever involved has benefited you. And you'll be surprised to see that there are many things that we can be very grateful for in our lives. So Zig Ziglar, who is a motivational speaker, and he passed, I believe, in 2012. I really like his quote here. He says, gratitude is the healthiest of all human emotions. The more you express gratitude for what you have, the more likely you will have even more to express gratitude for. So again, think about that in terms of the virtuous positive cycle here that gratitude creates. Another aspect to thinking about promoting well-being is giving. So there's been a lot of scientific research over the last decade showing that pro-social giving, that is giving to others as compared to giving to yourself, promotes well-being. And they've done studies like, hey, here's $5, buy somebody else a cup of coffee. And I guess with $5, it's probably a Starbucks coffee, versus buying coffee just for yourself. And they found that when you actually buy coffee for others or give to others as compared to yourself, it actually creates greater well-being in yourself. And so kind of we can apply that principle not only to finances, but we can apply it to many other things where when we give to others without expecting anything in return, we actually benefit in terms of well-being. So here are a couple of ways beyond kind of financial giving. You can give the gift of time. So listen to others, not merely just nod inattentively. Again, sometimes we can get into that habit, but actually listening, asking good questions, making connections with your own personal experiences, and seeking to understand the other person deeply. This will help both in terms of your romantic relationships and relationships in general. You can also give the gift of effort to others as well by helping them. When you hear that someone is in need, are you able to see how you can meet that need? I like this quote by Denzel Washington. It says, at the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. And I think this rings really true the older that I get, that it's really about giving and giving to others. The other aspect, the other G that I want to think about is in terms of grit. So Angela Duckworth, as many of you know, coined the concept of grit, and she's an authority on this topic. She talks about grit in terms of passion and perseverance. So a significant part of passion is really finding something that you love to do. So when I was in high school, I actually wanted to quit school because I just found that school was such a drudgery. It was only after I served in the military for 2.5 years that the hiatus gave me pause to really think about what am I passionate about. And I found psychology, and I pursued it in college. And from then on, I just didn't feel like it was drudgery at all. It wasn't work, it was passion. Of course, there are ups and downs, but finding passion helps sustain you through difficulties and gives you joy when you start facing challenges, or even finding joy even in difficult moments as well. So for myself, I feel like I excelled in what I was doing, and I was willing to weather those challenges. So think about what you enjoy doing, what tasks or work best utilizes your strengths and your giftings. And I think that's really important in terms of developing personal well-being. The other aspect of passion is also, I know many of you are talented, and you guys will be asked to do many different things. My advice for you is to learn to say no, because you will have many requests. A significant part of maintaining your passion is to say no to things that may exhaust you or that may lead to burnout. And in fact, college student burnout is really high, so we just need to be aware of it. So don't take on tasks just because you want to please others or just because there's a need. Do it because it's genuinely meaningful to you, and there's a match between your gifting and also that need as well. Often by being focused, you can really do the things that are most important. I like this quote by Steve Jobs. It says, it's only by saying no that you can concentrate on the things that are really important. With regard to perseverance, I want to mention that there are two types of mindsets that have been shown as well to be very promotive of, one mindset has been shown to be very promotive of well-being, the other not so much, especially in challenges. The thing is, in life, there will be many challenges to your well-being. You'll also face many failures potentially. And one of the things to really cultivate and develop is a growth mindset. So in a nutshell, I summarize a growth mindset as a mastery mindset. So you know that mastering something worthwhile often requires failure and trial and error. It's effortful. You will receive criticism and you will receive negative feedback, but it helps you grow. It helps you master something that you're passionate about. So growth mindset can really help you overcome negativity, challenges, and failures. By contrast, a fixed mindset, and again, sometimes we can fall into this very easily, is a performance-focused one. So you don't really pursue things to master them, but you're just trying to perform so that you make yourself look good. And we can all fall in the trap of that. You don't pursue feedback, you don't like criticism, and as a result, you don't grow. And so it's very important to cultivate a mastery mindset when you kind of work on things, and even when you work on yourself, recognizing that failure and trial and error is very common. And so that way you don't give up on yourself, and that you're willing to put in the time and energy as well. I like this quote by Arianna Huffington's mom. So many of you know Arianna Huffington. She is the founder or co-founder of Huffington Post, which is one of the biggest news websites in the world. And she's currently, I believe, an author of dozens of books. And when asked about kind of, how she succeeded, she actually said her first book was actually rejected by 36 publishers. And one of the things that really stuck with her as a teenager, her mom said this to her, and her mom's name is Ellie, I believe. And she said, failure is not the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone to success. And so often, I think in our world, we often think of failure as the opposite of success, right? But I think it's so important to really have that growth mindset and to think about failure as a way to succeed. Finally, we want to think about ways that we can develop organizational well-being. I call it the ABCs of leadership. I realize I have 10 minutes left, and I just want to go through this really quickly. The two main tasks that leaders often have to do, one is accomplishing work that's before them. So I call it the A part. The B part is building relationships. And you do this through role modeling, which is character, which I've talked about. So it's very important to practice those positive habits and mindsets in yourself before expecting others to do the same, and also be able to communicate as well. So Nitin Nohria, who's the Dean of Harvard Business School, says communication is the real work of leadership. With regard to task and relationship, we can kind of break it down to kind of think about ways we can communicate better on those two aspects. And again, just bring all the different leadership theories to bear here from organizational research, just to highlight a few. One is with regard to tasks, it's very important to have clear expectations, right? So when you want to communicate with someone, let them know exactly what you need by when. So instead of saying, can you send this email? Can you send this email by August 8, 5 p.m.? Again, a very trivial example. And I'm not saying that you should micromanage, but you should just give very clear expectations. The other important aspect of task is also to make meaning for those who are under you. You need to regularly communicate with others. How does this task align with the mission of our organization? So think about the psychological well-being aspect of purpose and meaning. So we want to make sure that people can see that vision and can tie what they're doing to that vision. The other aspect is building relationships. You want to express supportiveness, and of course, not just say that, I'm behind your decision and will stand by you, but really demonstrate and mean that. But of course, if you demonstrate and demonstrate it without communicating it, I think it's important to do both. Not merely just show through your actions, but also to communicate it as well. The other aspect is in terms of encouragement. It's very important to communicate to those who are around you that you are pleased with the work that they have done. And in fact, there's a lot of research in positive psychology. Again, the numbers vary in terms of what they estimate, but they often say it takes about 5 compliments to negate, or 5 positive things to negate 1 negative thing that you say. So really kind of think about that. Are you actually communicating that encouragement and that positivity to others around you as a leader? So just want to highlight a couple of resources before we go to Q&A. There's the Steps to Lead framework that I'm sure many of you know. If you don't know, I would encourage you to check it out. Really has self-improvement tools to bolster student fortitude and success here at Purdue, and well-being is very central to that, along with leadership too. And then there's the other aspect, which is I'll be teaching a class in the fall. I call it Psychology 123, Beyond Mental Health on the Science of Well-being. So there we talk about both the theories and also the practices of well-being. I want to make it a very practical class. If you're interested, sign up. I'll be happy to have you. So yeah, now we move to a time of Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll stop the screen share right now so I can see everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Tay. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. I guess I can kick it off. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you do in your research.
It's a great question. I do research on the measurement of well-being. There's a lot of interest right now in organizations and in governments on how do we measure the different aspects of well-being. And we do this through surveys. More and more so, there's the whole kind of big data science perspectives, where we start to look at, for instance, Facebook and Twitter data, what people are actually saying, in order to find out what dimensions of well-being are people talking about, and also at what levels are they at in terms of well-being. So that's my main area of research. I'm also very interested in ways that people can improve their well-being, and also going beyond well-being to kind of think about character as well, and character strengths.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Oh, we have one in the chat.
Okay, let me see.
And Kelsey also had a question too, whenever.
Okay, so this question is by Caroline. Does the field of positive psychology have anything to do with the humanistic approach to psychology? I think there are some overlaps. So like Maslow was one of the first few psychologists who really focused on kind of a humanistic approach to psychology, and and Carl Rogers as well, really kind of thinking about positive attributes and ways that people can grow. But positive psychology has really kind of taken that on by kind of bridging it with scientific approaches. So not merely in terms of theory, but really grounding it in empirical research. So I would say that positive psychology owes a lot to humanistic approaches to psychology, but now it's really kind of taken off as its own thing.
I'm Kelsey. If I could ask my question.
Hi, Kelsey.
I am the vice president of the Purdue Student Athlete Advisory Committee, and we started like a mental health group within athletics last year. We had meetings and had our psychologists talk, just had like open conversations about topics regarding like well-being, really, not just mental health. But the attendance was very low, and I think it's really hard to get people as like athletes especially to get them to take time to improve their mental health, because it's like there's a stigma about showing weakness and stuff. So I just had a question, like wanted to ask if you have any recommendations, just to, like encourage people to make happiness and well-being a priority.
Yeah, like that's a great question. Yeah, I think that you know, it's often hard to quote unquote help people realize well-being is important. It's often when somebody has some kind of challenge that they realize, oh wow, you know, well-being is really vital. I would say, you know, as far as possible, if well-being can be baked into the training and kind of the conversations themselves that athletes are having, that would be great. If you have something separate, then it feels almost like, oh, this is like something extra that we need to do. One of the things, practical things that we've been doing at the College of Health and Human Sciences is I've actually developed a mobile application where we kind of think about it as kind of Slack or like Nextdoor, where people are engaged in conversations about well-being, and we can create activities, students can create activities around well-being. And so that is one way, practical way, to kind of embed well-being, daily conversation, and the different activities that athletes might be having.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Is there any other questions? give people just a minute here. Okay, well, I don't see any more in the chat. So thank you so much, Dr. Tay, for your time and just for sharing with us all tonight. We really appreciate it and learning how we can better incorporate well-being into the everyday practices as we lead our organization. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. Great seeing everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.